Hi everyone, thanks for joining us again. My name is Andrew Jones and this is Anvil Media's webinar, Decentralizing a Centralized World and Introduction into Blockchain Marketing. So before I dive into the presentation, we love to have participation, so we're going to have a question and answer session at the end. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. You can wait till the end to ask them, or you can ask them at any time during the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. If you're here watching this webinar, it's pretty safe to assume that you've heard about blockchain or cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or something similar in the last, year or so is when they've really started to get popular. Bitcoin went through the massive price increase in 2017 from 900 reaching almost 20,000 in December. So many eyes have been on the technology. A lot of people have been praising it, but there's also been a lot of people condemning it, thinking that it's just a scam or that it's just not going to live up to the hype that people say that the potential that it has. So the word blockchain in particular has become something of a buzzword, and nowadays it seems like every tech company or bank is launching a blockchain of their own. So we're going to go through, here's an overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about a few misconceptions about blockchain, and we'll address them, some common ones that I often hear when talking about this technology with people. Then we're going to talk about what blockchain actually is and what it does, the difference between a private and a public blockchain, what a cryptocurrency is, how blockchain and cryptocurrencies work together, and finally, how blockchain relates to marketing. After that, we'll have the question and answers. So the first misconception about blockchain is that blockchain is a revolutionary technology. And I know this might seem a bit confusing. After all, the title of the webinar is all about how blockchain will decentralize a centralized world. But actually, blockchain by itself is akin to a very slow Excel sheet. What it is it's a database, and when you want to make changes to the database, you have to add another block onto it. So now you have two blocks of information attached to each other. So it's sort of a version control of a database or a ledger. So we'll go into a little bit more detail later about how blockchain functions with a few other components to create a technology like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. But blockchain by itself is just the ledger system, which is one component out of many to make up these technologies. So it's become sort of a buzzword. People, they want to get people's attention by using the word blockchain, but a lot of what they're offering, isn't all that innovative. Some people estimate that blockchains have actually been around since the 90s. There wasn't a real innovative breakthrough in the technology until 2008, when Satoshi Nakamoto solved the double spend problem with Bitcoin. That's something that we can talk about later. If people have more questions about that, I can definitely address it at the end. So next misconception is that blockchains are investment vehicles. And while they can be something you invest your time and money and resources into, that's not the primary function of a blockchain. Here is a bad way to think about investing in blockchains and cryptocurrencies. I just heard about this new ICO, and I'm going to max out my credit card while tokens are at 3 cents, and I'm going to sell when it gets to $1 and make a bunch of profit. And that's just not a very good way to think about investing in it. I've heard people compare cryptocurrencies, blockchains to stocks, and at first I was a bit resistant to that. However, it is actually a pretty good analogy when thinking about the investment functions of blockchains and cryptocurrencies. You wouldn't want to just invest in a stock unless you knew something about the company that you were buying stock in. You don't just buy every new stock that comes out when it's cheap, hoping that it becomes more expensive and you can sell and make a profit. So there's a good chance that the value of a stock won't go up after you buy it. Most companies go out of business. Most companies fail. And it's the same with cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. If you don't understand the technology, and if you don't understand what you're putting your money into, or what the value proposition of that individual token or technology is, then you're more likely to lose money rather than make money. I always tell people, as much as I love talking about this sort of technology and I love introducing people to it and getting them interested in it, I tell them don't buy anything unless you've done your research and you know that you're making a gamble on a technology, on whether or not you think that specific technology is solving a problem and that people will eventually want to use it. There are many, many different types of blockchains and currencies out there. Bitcoin is the most popular, but as anyone who's invested in the crypto space knows, even Bitcoin could go down to zero at any moment. So there are a lot of alternatives out there. They do a lot of different things. The biggest one that you may have heard of is called Ethereum. It has a very different function than Bitcoin, but they all do different things. So do your research before you try to invest and make money off of a blockchain or a cryptocurrency. On the opposite of that, blockchains are stores of value. This one I've heard specifically associated with Bitcoin, has increased adoption, has caused high transaction fees and long wait times until the transactions are verified. People have been less likely to use it as a day-to-day currency. So they've been starting to say that it's just a store of value. You'll hear people refer to it as a digital or virtual gold. And again, it's possible that there's some truth to this, because there's a finite amount of Bitcoin that can be created and made. It's possible that it could someday in the future be used as or thought of as a digital gold where you can just store value in, and maybe it'll hopefully increase in value. But really, that's the least interesting application I can think of for Bitcoin and blockchains in general. So really, there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do, and that's just the least of it. And finally, and this one always kind of makes me chuckle, is that cryptocurrencies are for criminals. You hear this one about people buying illicit substances on the dark web, and it's all about, you hear people say that people are just trying to hide what they're doing, and this is just making it easier for criminals to get away with certain things. But the truth of this is really any new technology that you create, if it's useful to law-abiding citizens, it's most likely going to be useful to criminals as well. Automobiles are used by criminals. Rubber masks in the shape of president faces used by criminals, but both of these things are useful to everyday citizens as well. So any technology you create that has a use has the potential to be used by anyone for good or bad, and there's no reason to fight any specific technology just because it has a potential to be used for crime. So then you might be wondering, what is blockchain? Another question you might have is, what is a cryptocurrency? As I've mentioned that several times as well. And finally, how does a blockchain work in a cryptocurrency? What is the relationship? How do they work together? And these are all really great questions, and we will get into all of these one at a time. A blockchain is defined as a distributed digital ledger that is used to record transactions across many computers so that the record cannot be altered retroactively without the alteration of all subsequent blocks and the consensus of the network. So all this means is that, as I mentioned before, new blocks are added onto the ledger whenever a transaction or change is made. And so this way it records the entire history of everything that is done on that chain. And so transaction can be used, if you're talking about a technology like Bitcoin, it can simply be a currency transaction. However, blockchains can be used for many different applications, and the transaction can simply be a passage of data, of information. It could be used in real estate, for tokens can be used to represent actual real estate property. There are a lot of things that can be transacted through a blockchain and recorded. And so the important part that makes this so much different and so much more impactful than other ledger systems, though, is that it cannot be altered retroactively. You can't change it. A lot of times you'll hear the word immutable. No one can just go back and change previous data. You have to add on a new block. For someone to change blocks in the past, they would have to rewrite that block and every single block that comes after it. And the way that this works, though, because the blockchains are distributed throughout a network and everybody is using the same protocol and everyone is looking at the same chain, an individual, a bad actor making changes, is not going to win the consensus of the entire network. Everyone has to agree, and this agreement is made by everyone sharing out their latest version of the blockchain. So when everyone's sharing, it's more likely that the correct history is going to be shared throughout the network. So to actually change the network and change the history, you would have to have more computing power than anyone else, which is why it's called a 51% attack. You have to have more computing power so that you can overwrite all the blocks in the history to change the entire history of the chain. And so because of this, blockchains actually have a higher security when more people are on the network and participating in the network. One issue that blockchain kind of has right now is education. And as I mentioned about blockchain becoming something of a buzzword, one of the influencing factors in this is the private versus public blockchain. So a lot of companies, they see the technology and they see that it's becoming very popular. People like the idea of it, and so they want to profit off of it. They want to use it for their own business. And one of the problems with this is that the public blockchains are inherently decentralized, distributed. Anyone can go and download the source code and start running a network of their own and become an equal member of the blockchain. A private blockchain, however, is going to be by invitation only, and so a lot of these companies are creating their private blockchains that are being used for specific business purposes. And these can be very helpful. They just are going to be not exactly doing the same thing as the public chains. But they do have many of the similarities, though. According to IBM, which is running a blockchain of their own, both are decentralized peer-to-peer networks where each participant maintains a replica of a shared append-only ledger of digitally signed transactions. Both maintain the replicas in sync through a protocol referred to as consensus, and both provide certain guarantees on the immutability of the ledger, even when some participants are faulty or malicious. So the underlying idea of them is the same. But the difference is that public blockchains are open to anyone and everyone. Anyone can join, and it's encouraged that people do. Private blockchains require an invitation. If you're running a business and say that you want to use blockchain for keeping track of supply chain management, and you want to keep track of products that are being transported across the world, you don't want just random people joining into your network and putting their input in and affecting the consensus when they really have no information about what you're doing and they're not even part of the business at all. In a public blockchain, all users are equal in the sense that you have the equal ability to run any kind of network. If you are a bit more familiar with blockchain and cryptocurrencies, you'll know that there is a debate going on between people who mine for new currencies and they create the blocks through something called a proof of work algorithm. And then there are people who are just running a partial node in the network, and so they have a copy, but they are not actually putting in any energy to creating new blocks. So there is a bit of debate on who has the power and if people running a partial node actually have any power at all. But the difference is that anyone has the choice. Anyone can run any kind of node they want to. It just depends on how much energy and time and resources that they want to put into the network. With a private blockchain, certain users are designated as regulatory authorities. Again, with the supply chain management example, you want to make sure that certain things are happening correctly. You want to make sure that somebody isn't lying about whether or not a shipment was received or sent on time. So you have certain regulatory authorities that have more permissions than others. The same way a business is run, where you have hierarchies of authority, the same thing is necessary on private blockchains, where the consensus is made not just by the majority, but is also weighted by people who have to check for make sure certain things are being met. So on the public blockchain, the network consensus is strengthened by more users. The more people that you have checking each other's blockchains, their chain histories, the more likely it is that you are to have an accurate chain. And the harder it is for someone to attain 51% of the computing power and act as a malicious actor and change the history. On a private blockchain, the more users can complicate the governance structure as any business runs. As it scales up, it's going to be a bit more complicated to make sure that the hierarchy is being met, that everything is running smoothly. Someone has to answer to someone else, so more users can complicate it that way. However, the less users on the private blockchain means easier scalability. You can include more information in the transactions, and you have less people overall trying to make transactions and make changes to the chain. In a public blockchain, more users can slow the transactional throughput and hinder the scalability. That's one of the big issues with Bitcoin. There's a lot of people trying to use it, so they can't fit in all of the transactions in each block. So what's happening is that the fees are going up really high, and people are having to wait several hours until their transactions go through. And so this actually caused a huge debate. It's something that people are going to have to deal with in the future if they want a public chain like this to reach mass adoption and everyone to be using it on a regular basis. So then if a blockchain is just a ledger, then what is a cryptocurrency? A cryptocurrency is a digital currency in which encryption techniques are used to regulate the generation of units of currency and verify the transfer. So again, the currency can be used as a literal currency, but it can also be used as many other things as well. The cryptocurrency uses the blockchain, but it also uses several other technologies to help it function. Cryptocurrencies are generally, they are a public blockchain. Anyone can join and participate and create coins or buy coins and participate in the function of what the coin does. So how does a blockchain work in a cryptocurrency? Where do these two fit together? So the blockchain keeps the record of the transaction as data in the blocks. So you'll see in this block that Alice has 10 units. When she makes a transaction, that is included in the next block and attached to the end of the chain. So she sends her 10 units to Bob, and the new block with the latest transactions is shared around the network until the majority consensus is reached and the transaction is complete. So it's simply the blockchain in a cryptocurrency just keeps track of the information as it passes along. The reason that this is important to cryptocurrencies is because you don't want someone to be able to spend the same token twice. So this is the double spend problem that had hindered cryptocurrencies and virtual currencies from existing prior to 2008, was that someone could spend the token, give it to someone, and then they could simply use the same information and send it to someone else, and now both people would have it. So the question is, who has the original and who has the counterfeit, and how can you tell the difference? So on the blockchain, you have a shared history, so everyone knows where the cryptocurrency had been moved from and where it has gone. So it can automatically check to see if the transaction is valid through the entire history of the blockchain. To stop people from changing the blockchain, they introduced the proof of work algorithm, which is simply someone has to solve a complicated cryptography problem in order to show that they're putting in work, and then once the problem is solved, it creates a new block, and they're rewarded with a small incentive, and all the transactions are added into the new block. And so the reason this works is because if someone wanted to go back and change something in the past, they would have to rewrite, they'd have to solve a problem for the block before the one they wanted to change, and then also the block they wanted to change. At the same time, people are still looking for the problem to solve the problem for the newest block. So you'd have to solve at least 2 blocks in the time that they have to solve the problem for just one. And so you can't keep up, and this is what makes it so immutable and so resistant to fraud. So finally, how does blockchain affect marketing, and how can it be used in marketing? One of the biggest applications is that ad networks will be built on blockchains or dApps. A dApp is simply a decentralized application. So this is just an application just like software or application on your phone, except for that instead of one person having a server that runs all of the information for that app, the information is distributed among anyone who decides to download the protocol, and everyone can participate in how it works and how it runs and how it changes. So ad networks can be built on the blockchain to do several things. One of the big ones that people foresee is the potential to eliminate bot fraud that creates faulty clicks and traffic. So there are several different applications that you can use even now. There are ones that whitelist websites that don't have bot farms, so they're just trying to eliminate the websites that run advertisements that are just clicked on over and over again by bots on the page. There are networks that each advertiser and publisher has to put in a bit of the token as an incentive, as a stake in the ad, and when a user clicks on it, they're both rewarded with, well, the advertiser's rewarded with getting the user to pay attention to their ad. The publisher is rewarded with getting an actual user to click on the ad. The user themselves are actually rewarded with a bit of the token as well. So this way, it incentivizes users to actually look at ads and click on ads because they're getting something out of the process. It can also improve targeting because on these cryptographically secure networks, the privacy for each user is going to be extremely enhanced. You won't be able to use cookies. You won't be able to have as much information as advertisers have about the users now. If you don't have all that information, it could harm the targeting of your ads. It could make it a lot more difficult. But users will actually be able to tell advertisers the kind of interests that they have, and it should actually increase and improve the targeting of advertisers, because users, there's a sort of dialogue where the users are telling the advertisers what they want, and so the advertisers are able to give them what they want. And then the user looks at the ad because they are being incentivized not only with a token or a cryptocurrency on the blockchain, but they also are more likely to get a relevant ad. Cryptocurrencies can also be used as tokens for promotional tools. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening even right now with this. You can create a token, essentially just a copycat of Bitcoin, but call it whatever you want, and then you can offer specific opportunities or privileges to people to use only if they are buying and spending your token. So there are musicians and artists who are doing this right now, even, who are offering private shows and just specific events specifically for people who are using their own cryptocurrency. This just opens up a lot of opportunity, and this isn't even necessarily a new technological innovation. It's just integrating the innovation into everyday life and getting people interested in it and using it to interest people and pull them into your product. Also, you could use smart contracts to execute promotions or deals when certain conditions are met. So a smart contract is essentially a bit of code that you include in the information on a blockchain, and when certain conditions are met, the code automatically executes itself. So for example, if someone's on your website and they're on the store, you could have a promotion where when certain conditions are met, they get a deal. So certain people, if they're over a certain age, or you're running a promotion trying to get people of an older age, when they're over that certain age, they could automatically get promotion. There are other things that smart contracts can do. There are a lot of applications for these across the board. A lot of people think that there's going to be kind of a gray area between lawyers and these smart contracts, because the smart contracts don't necessarily need to be written in legalese, in very legal jargon. As long as all conditions are met, it will automatically execute, and you don't need a middleman. So this will be able to be applied to advertising and online, in e-commerce, in all sorts of ways. And so now, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And again, thanks everyone for joining us. I guess let me ask a question. Does anyone here own any cryptocurrency? Has anyone ever used that technology before? You can go ahead and just answer that in the chat. So we have a question. When do you think that this will start to pick up, the dApps in particular, the decentralized applications? And so that is always a hard question to answer, because this stuff exists now and anyone can begin to participate. So the question, I guess, is when do you think mass adoption will occur? And that, I would say, could be anywhere as soon as 5 years, but as far away as 20 years. There are certain issues with scalability that need to be solved, and there's just a lot of education that needs to happen. People are hesitant to people are hesitant to get into a new technology, especially one that is a bit more technical. When the iPhone came out, it really made a lot of things simpler. You had a touch screen. You could click on an icon to get on an app. Cryptocurrencies and blockchains right now are a lot more complicated. You have to have a bit of coding knowledge. And so I think this is a good tip for advertisers, especially younger advertisers who will be around to see this technology really take hold, even if it takes a bit longer, is that coding is going to be necessary to set up some of these protocols and make sure that they're running. The promotions that I talked about, running promotions, you'll be essentially programming ads to do specific things when people click on them. The more people who learn to code, I know that they're introducing that to a lot of kids at younger ages. I think that kids who are growing up learning to code will help move this along. So mass adoption will happen when people learn more about the technology and when the technology is easier to use. If you signed in with your name, you will receive a copy of the presentation and the recording tomorrow. So again, thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you do a bit more research on your own and learn a bit more about it. So thanks again.